You wanted to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm sorry Joan's not here because I actually had a couple of jokes to start on him. When he found out that I was going to speak, he called me to make sure I was not going to speak for more. That over time, I mean, he knows I digress. And then he also told me that he was praying that the subject would be something which would be pertinent. And unfortunately, I guess, ISIS in the Middle East has made this topic rather pertinent and timely at this time, as I hope that I can show. Anyway, you see here it says, translating for Spanish, however, Rotary trip was instrumental in the endeavor. And really, as Doug was mentioning about the foundation, this came to be when I went to Argentina as the leader of a GSE group. And when we went to San Francisco, the local Rotarians, knowing both of my Italian origin and my Jewish religion, introduced me to the author Kuznitsky, who had written a book on anti-Semitism in Italy, and of course our family was in there. And so they introduced me. And then he mentioned that he was writing a new book about Spain, and I became interested, told him that after he finished it to send it to me, and I would see if we would translate it. What happened then was he sent it to us, and I made a few inquiries, and people thought it was worthwhile translating. We got a publisher right away with a single application, got a publisher, and we started to work on it. And it really was a 2-year job. And Joan, of course, as she has been doing for all these years with all the letters that you have seen and enjoyed, she has edited my work for all those years, and she basically did this. And it was a 2-year, like I said. Now, let me see if this thing works. Okay, now this is going to be many of you have seen this before. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. This is Santayana. But I like this other one. The pattern of history can repeat themselves incessantly, but they never repeat themselves fully. They always change, but the pattern is there. And this was written by Benjamin Netanyahu, the father of the current Prime Minister of Israel. He was a professor at Cornell. He died recently. Anyway, the topic in the book, basically, we talk about forced conversions. And this is why I'm saying that this is something that is present right now. Now, we talked about anti-converso agitation, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and the Spanish Inquisition and the conversos, the cleanliness of blood, the Jesuits and the cleanliness of blood. Then there's Franco. Remember the title of the book is Strains of Antisemitism, and there's something interesting there. Then the Spanish cleanliness of blood, the Nuremberg and Italian racial laws, and then the Spanish Inquisition. I don't know whether we'll get to this later ones during the presentation because there's a lot of material, but I'll try to get over there. Now, in the Iberian Peninsula, during the 17th, in the Iberian Peninsula, and you can see this, there were forced conversions, and it was either you convert, or you died, or you left, or you leave. And this is pretty much what we see right now. And this is why I like Netanyahu's comment, because these things happened in the 17th century, the 7th century, then they happened again in the 15th century. And it depended who was in power. It was the Christian or the Muslims. And they always did it to each other, and the Jews were always in between, because there was never enough Jewish power to oppose on the other, and actually there is no Jewish tradition of forced conversions. Then we went to the question of cleanliness of blood, and we'll express a little bit more. Now, the origin of the cleanliness of blood, which really says that blood, that if you had impure blood, you were an impure individual. Now, Castro, who is one of the Spanish historians, and here we have to think about this. Racism is a bad word, and we will find that people are trying to defend their culture as non-racist, which is an understandable thing. So Castro talks about the limpieza of cleanliness of blood, and Netanyahu says that Castro's conclusion rests on a misreading of the book of Ezra on mixed marriages. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar, so I'm not going to ask, don't ask me about who's right there. Now, there are two mass conversions of Jews that become relevant to the issue at hand. One happened in 1109 and the other one in 1391. Now, both were followed popular uprising where many Jews were killed. Now, one of the things that happened, and it happened in modern times also, and it's in the book, but one of the things that happened there was that when there were these massive conversion of Jews were not permitted to do certain jobs. In fact, Jews were not allowed to be in government. They were not allowed to be in church, in ecclesiastic thing. They were kept with lower jobs. And you know what the stereotype of Jews is, that they were moneylenders, etc., etc. But what happened was that once they were converted, then there was no prohibition for the jobs. Now, the tradition of Judaism is, of course, that you are scholars, you read, you write, you have your Bible study, etc., etc. And all of a sudden, what happened in those societies was that this was a class of individuals who had read, who were able to do calculation and read. And all of a sudden, they started taking the jobs from the old Christians. And so what happened all of a sudden was that the old Christians all of a sudden saw these people who had been lower class all of a sudden became upper class, and they were able to take the job. And so there was resentment. And that is why there were the popular uprising. Now this seems to be contradictory, okay? Because then we had more conversions, because it was either when we had these two massive, when we had the conversions at that time, you either converted or died. And so a lot of the Jews converted at that particular time. Now, the sequence of events then began that culminated in the enactment of localized cleanliness of blood legislation. And it began with anti-conversive, oops, something is wrong here.
Skip to
Okay. Basically, what happened was when there was the uproar in 1109, Alfonso VI had gone against ecclesiastic law, and he had placed Jews in very prominent positions. A popular revolt in 1109 resulted in many Jews being killed and many converted. Now, it was later on that things did not move as fast then as they move now. And then Alfonso VII was forced to pass legislation which denied those jobs not only to Jews but also to the converted and also to their offspring. That is the beginning of anti-conversion legislation. That is when they started putting the legislation that was originally against Jews. They just transferred it to also the conversion.
Hey, who were they converted to?
Excuse me?
Who were the Jews converted to? Christianity or?
Well, these were Jews who had converted to Catholicism. I mean, this was basically. Okay, now you see, one of the things that happened was that the anti-conversion environment made the proselytizing efforts of the church, and the Dominicans in particular, because it was the Dominicans who were very active, more difficult, because why convert if there was no advantage to it? And so Alfonso X, the so-called Alfonso the Wise, undid earlier legislation that made the persecution of the conversos punishable. Now, what happened then is something did not show up here. With the legal protection, a large number of the conversions ensued because now they had the legal protection, and as you had a large number of conversions, again there was a new revolt because of the same, at least ostensibly, because of the same reason that we talked before. Now, the next thing that happened is the Spanish Inquisition, which was different from the Inquisition in other countries, was established ostensibly to deal with crypto-Jews. These were people who converted, but at the same time kept the Jewish religion in their homes. And there were very few by this time, because generations had passed and people had been converted, and it was not convenient to keep a Jewish tradition in the home, and so there were a few, but there were some. And in fact, at that particular time, this particular Inquisition found some individuals at one of the monastery that had actually were keeping the high holidays, the ones that are just coming now, and with the fasting and everything, and the guy simply got burned at the stake. There were 5 of them, and 2 of them were exonerated. One of them had a life sentence, and another 2 others who were burned at the stake. Now, the thing that was interesting at that particular time was that whoops. Now, all right, the thing that happened at that particular time was that Ferdinand, Ferdinand and Isabella, Ferdinand really was opposed to the use of the Inquisition for any reason other than religious. But what happens next is that besides the fact that technology sometimes fails, and I should have done with that, brought my copy, but okay. Essentially, what happened next was that when Ferdinand died, the Inquisition, with the pressure of anti-conversion individuals, started to persecute the conversos. Well, it was then in 1548, I believe, that the primate, the Archbishop of Toledo, introduced what he called the cleanliness of blood. Cleanliness of blood says that up to 20 generations, if you had any Jewish blood going back 20 generations, you were considered Jewish. And I want you to notice that this, in a way, that there are some things particularly similar in the history of this country when it relates to some of the African Americans. But cleanliness of blood actually prohibited intermarriage, and there also, and it prohibited the conversos from living in certain places. There were places where they actually had the authority of the kings to stop, not to be able to live there. And again, here we have some parallels in this country, because we know that during the period of Reconstruction and the period of Jim Crow, there were the so-called sunset cities, and where no African American could be after sunset, and there were some right here in Ohio, as a matter of fact. Going on the, if I can see it that way.
Which slide are we on?
Okay,
Just too far ahead.
go ahead. Okay, I think we're okay there. Now, do you want to go back?
Back. There you
Okay,
go.
right then.
Sorry
Now,
about
basically, Ferdinand and Isabella were very friendly to the Jews. Now, all of you know that in 1492, it wasn't only Columbus that sailed, but all the Jews were expelled. The Muslims were expelled from Spain 10 years later. And the origin of, then we'll talk a moment about the origin of the Inquisition. And the Spanish writers, again, Castro and Sancho Albornoz, another one of those Spanish writers who actually went to Argentina eventually, claimed it was a Jewish invention. And Netanyahu says that the conclusion rests on the misunderstanding of Jewish legal procedures. And the legal procedures, the differences were the accusatorial or the inquisitorial procedures. And I'm not an attorney, I'm a microbiologist, and I'm sure the attorneys can explain those. It was simply a difference in the method of procedure that had to do with how people were accused of crimes, etc., etc. But anyway, that's something that there's several pages in the book that relates to that particular aspect. Now, when his book was translated into Spanish, there was a very public controversy in the press. And some of the Spanish writers were against Netanyahu because this was a matter of pride for them. And because Netanyahu felt that Ferdinand was under pressure by the anti-conversion people, and he needed to assuage the anti-conversion sentiment. Now, there are some others that decided that thought that Netanyahu was right. I actually thought at the time that I would like to translate the controversy itself, but the publisher, for a number of reasons, including copyright reasons, thought that it would not be a very good idea. It would have added about 4,000 words to the book. Now, that was the 1492 expulsion. The converts or leave, and again, some historians said that it's because the kingdom wanted to form a common religion. This had happened earlier also. The common religion had happened under the Visigoths in the 6th and 7th century. They became Christians, and so they wanted to force everybody to be Christian so they would have a common religion in the country. Now, Netanyahu felt it was under popular pressure, incited by racists and the Inquisition. Now come the final steps. In 1548, Salicio, he submitted the justification for the cleanliness of blood, and I mentioned that already. And this is basically where there's the conversos, their offspring to the 20th generation, could not climb up into the social. And this is the intermarriage and the ability to reside in certain localities. Now the Jesuits then come in, and this is important in a way because it relates later on to the Italian laws, and that. But the Jesuits adopted a cleanliness of blood statute in which one could not enter the order if we were descended from Jews up to the 5th generation. And this was very controversial among the Jesuits, and this was happened particularly in the Iberian orders in Spain and Portugal. Some of the other countries, they really didn't particularly care about it, and so they did not enforce it. Now, this brings us to the discrimination, because we started from a religious discrimination and it became racial. Because here is where the Jewish blood, so to speak, contaminated the so-called Spanish blood. Now, two concepts came up at this time. The concept of Hispanicity or Spanishness and casticism. In other words, there was this type of characteristic. They felt that the Spanish, other than the Jews or even the conversos, had Hispanicity where the conversos did not. Okay, now we move to a very different time. And Spain discovers the Jews in Morocco. They didn't know they had Jews because they had been expelled. There were no Jews in Spain, and a lot of Jews had moved to Morocco. Now, all of a sudden, there's a philo-Sephardism starts to develop. And here I have to explain something. I mentioned to somebody the other day about Sephardic Jews, and they looked at me like, huh? What's that? And simply there are two groups of Jews in terms of genetics. There are those Ashkenazi Jews from Central Europe and Russia, and then there were the Spanish, the Sephardim that originated in Spain, North Africa, and the Levant in general. And there are some genetics. In fact, there is a Sephardic gene that is transmitted through the paternal line. Now, Primo de Rivera in the 20s offered Spanish citizenship to Sephardim, but this was under very stringent condition that few could avail themselves the opportunity for economic and logistical things. Now, this offer has been repeated in 2014, and I understand there's quite a bit of interest in it. But, okay, now, Franco equated and he hated Jews, Masons, and communists. But there was a problem because he became a philo-Sephardic. In other words, here we stand where Sephardic Jews were considered to have Spanishness. And so we have a transition here. This is why the title of the book is Strains of Anti-Semitism, because there were some strange things involved in this. During the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, the National Front, Franco's National Front, was supported by the North African, while the Jews that fought in the International Brigade on the side of the Republic were most part Ashkenazi. And Franco was very opposed to the Ashkenazi. He equated the Ashkenazi Jews to basically then we put it to the stereotype, the long-living stereotype of Jews, where the Sephardic Jews were different. And he actually said that. Now, there are two things, and time is short now. The Nuremberg laws and the Italian racial laws basically imitated the provisions of the cleanliness of blood. They were different, but they imitated, okay? And the author thinks this is so because all three were designed to the preservation of racial concepts: Spanishness, the German volkisch, and the Italian race. In fact, I was deprived of my Italian citizenship, and I got a new birth certificate that assigned to me the Jewish race, even though it was basically not considered a religion. Now, the Inquisition is the Inquisition comparable to the Holocaust, as symbolized by Auschwitz and other exterminations? Neither Netanyahu nor the author think so, and this comes to because of statutes. The Nuremberg statutes did not seek obliteration of the other as individuals, while the Nazis, in their final solution, went beyond the Nuremberg statutes. Now, the Inquisition also followed the statutes. So it was a matter, whether they're comparable or not, was really a matter, in the opinion of Netanyahu and of the author of the book, whether the statutes were followed or whether they can be compared. And I guess that essentially they weren't. Now the Holocaust in terms of Auschwitz was a completely different phenomenon, but one that has been repeated in some places. And if you look at our own history in the 20th century, you find Rwanda, you find the Balkans, you find Yugoslavia, you find Poland, Cambodia, and so on. And that was a typical thing. Okay, that's it. Well, you don't have time. We will endeavor to answer any question that you. Remember that what I learned by having to check through the tremendously good library that we have at Ohio State. What I had to do is the author references were in Spanish books, from which there may have been originally in English. So I had to find the original English citation, and vice versa, in where the citation was from Spanish books where there were English translations, and again I had to do that. So I had to do that with all the Netanyahu work, and I had to do that with some of the Spanish work. But what I learned, and whatever other answer I may give, I may have, will be come from our look. And Joan will want to say something.
Hey! Before she says something, you revealed something that Joan is your editor. So when I read one of your letters and I come across a particularly lucid, measured passage, and I'm reading Joan's work. Really, aren't I?
I've written this down so that I won't forget. I anticipated one question. Yes, I really did enjoy almost all the time working with my husband. It was almost like being back in grad school years ago, 58 years ago at the University of Pennsylvania. It was. And I will not talk about the negative parts. Some parts in this, as you can imagine, were very difficult to digest. But as a history student myself, and I'm sure most of you agree with this, none of us is perfect. No human being is perfect. So when I heard of institutions having goofed, I wasn't decimated. And I'm thankful that they at least reformed in the end, 1946, the Jesuits. Today, this afternoon is the beginning of the Jewish High Holy Days, and we celebrate with Rosh Hashanah. I don't know if many of you realize that in all the synagogues in the States, there will be security. We don't have to have that in a lot of churches and some temples. Goes around the world too. And also, you might have read that there's a tremendous increase in anti-Semitism right now in Europe, especially in France. But as one current popular French Jewish author said, there is one good difference between what went on during Hitler and what goes on now. During Hitler, it was the government that pushed the anti-Semitism. The French government now is so worried because many thousands of Jews have already left France. They are doing their best to stem this anti-Semitism. And speaking individually and for all of you, we all know we can do our best in that area and try to fight hate wherever it is. It comes up unexpectedly, but it comes over and over again. So it's part of our soul to work on. And that's my bit.
Time is of the essence, so any questions?
Abramo, I have a question that I don't think there's there's any clear answer to this, but I would like to hear you reflect on current anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism today that stems from historical roots of the sort you've been investigating and writing about, versus the anti-Semitism that derives, say, from news coverage. When I was in Europe in July, the Gaza war was going on, so a typical half-hour news broadcast by CNN International or BBC, half-hour, 23 minutes of the half hour would be about the supposed atrocity, all the suffering in Gaza and so forth, 2 minutes about other news, and then 4 or 5 minutes of advertising. In other words, as you know, when Israel goes to war, there's relentless and controlled coverage of the damage that done to civilian populations. And I'm just wondering about the importance of that sort of coverage that, among other places, has had an impact I've seen in Japan, versus the historical causes that you
Well, I'm in a way not surprised. The only thing is, when I hear Palestinians say that the Jews have no right, or not only Palestinians say the land and they really simply haven't read the Bible, because basically the Jews, they were before the Palestinians. It really started before. I am a microbiologist. I keep on hiding behind that. But I have become, so what else is new? Okay, it's one of those things that if you look at the history of anti-Semitism, it really started in the 1100s, maybe a little bit earlier, and it was really an anger at the rejection. At the rejection of a religion. Because if you really think about it, if you have a set religion, the fact that somebody else does not accept is offensive. And therefore it actually brings you into question your own religion if you accept this other concept. Now, I have a particular view of religion, which is probably not something we want to speak about here, but that's my reaction to it. It's a so what? It's inevitable. That's the way it is. That's the way it's been, and unless people change, what we see nowadays with ISIS, okay. We see. My opinion is, for instance, what we're going to get involved in ISIS is in a religious war. Okay, because it is a religious war. But inside that religious war, there's another religious war.
You have to stop speaking like an Italian with your hands.
Well, anyway, no, they're inside. There's a religious war, and worry about a third crusade. Worry about this becoming a third crusade, because inside that phenomenon, there is another religious war between the Sunni and the Shiites. And if you get to the point where you have a third crusade, those two groups are going to get together against the outsiders. That is the danger that we have nowadays. And that is why it's very important that the other Muslim countries get involved in it, including Iran.
One of the quick informational question, you've introduced us to the Sephardim.
Yeah.
Of the current population of Israel, residing in Israel, what percentage are refugees from Muslim countries, largely Sephardim? I've heard it's more than half. Right?
I have no number. I have no number at this particular point. I have no number. There's certainly in my family there's a question of whether we are Ashkenazi or Sephardim. And I'm going to have a genetic study to see if nowadays with the genetic, just a little piece of white chromosome will tell.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Yeah.
I'm not by any means a historian, but wasn't there a time in Spain where the Moors were in charge?
Yeah.
And the three religions all lived together?
That is the first golden age of Spain, when the three religions worked together. And they worked together under the Almohads. But even though the Muslims were in charge, there was forced conversion. Okay, there was forced conversion. But they went things worked out pretty well during that period of time. And then the second golden age of Spain came a little bit later, during the after the expulsion, and when Spain went into Latin America, basically came into the America, and then they became very rich because of the gold that was transported to Spain. But that's another story. I can only comment a little bit by what I read in the book, reading the book, and so on, and some feelings of yeah.
Mike?
Hey, just a historical question. How were the Spanish able to get rid of Islamic influence? What was the main reason?
How did the Spaniards get rid of the Islamic influence?
By war.
By war.
I mean, it was a question, the so-called reconquest. Now, you have heard the Mexican talk about la reconquista, which at the time of coming back and picking up the Southwest, because it was Mexican. Well, anyway, this is what the Spaniards did. It was a Catholic reconquest through Ferdinand and Isabel over a period of time. And the Moors had come in, and then the Christians, with the help of some of the other Christian princes and kings, they eventually got rid of the Moors, got rid of the Jews, and so on. And then if you talk to my friends in Spain, he said that the expulsion was one of the worst things that ever happened to Spain. But anyway, I think any other questions?
Well, Abramo, as you know, we will be donating a book in your honor to commemorate this presentation and Joan's presentation. Thank you very much, Joan, in both your names, and we appreciate this very much. Very informative.
Thank you.